Equality is not always exactly as intended. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because there are differences between like what we can offer to every worker and how to do that. And the delivery mechanism for you is the state, and that's fine. And I understand that's a good concept. I somewhat agree with that. I'm not an anarchist, but my point is that there has never been a democratic process, and that in order to even achieve democracy, we need to have more political agency and more political autonomy. And the only way that we've kind of arrived at that has been through labor unions and the power of collective bargaining and all of that applied pressure that forced FDR and previous administrations to implement modest social reforms to correct the aberration, to correct all of the systemic inequalities. Well, not all of them, but some of them. But ultimately, we still operate under the assumption that this is totally fine and the best kind of organization that we can exist under. And that is why we still have, as you will also admit, politicians that are always going to represent the interests of corporations. It's not a new thing. It's not just because of Citizens United. The Citizens United decision is not the only reason why we have wealthy oligarchs paying politicians whatever they want to get whatever kind of legislation that they want. It predates 1978. It predates the New Deal. This has always been the case. And my point is that it's been the case because the system is designed to manufacture these results.
Yeah, no, I don't agree. So
explain to me this then. If it's not about if it's corporatism and not capitalism, then why did we have such a hard time coming to terms with the abolition of slavery? If it wasn't purely at the behest of capital that our political figures, why did they design this country, right? A country that you have called the best country on earth at many different points. Why did they design this country to have a non-direct, non-representative democracy that only worked for white male landowners and owners of slaves?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different answers to that. First off, there's always, I agree with you on that, there's always some competing interests, let's put it that way, between the capital owners and the non-capital owners. Slavery is a very stark example of that. And so but you should know that there was actually very large corporations around back then. The founding fathers actually despised those corporations. It was partly out of a revolution, not just against the British monarchy, but against those companies like the East Indian Company that they did that. The Boston Tea Party was not against the government, was not against the monarchy. It was against the British Tea Company that they did that. So, and they warned us about the takeover of corporations. Now, nonetheless, they were very affected by the capital situation in terms of slavery, et cetera. And, but also you have to give it in its proper historical context. So for example, people say, well, Islam actually greatly improved the rights of women back then in that geographic area, and that is true. They had no rights and Islam gave them some rights. I would counter that God should know that they should have full rights, right? Yeah. And so he should have amended the Quran by now or actually done it right. But when you talk about a democracy, we're not talking about a supernatural creature. We're talking about a normal evolution. The reason why I respect the founding fathers so much is that not only did they significantly increase the amount of participation in our government by taking it from just the lords and the royalty, et cetera, to propertied white males. That now seems anachronistic because it's anachronistic because we don't live in that time. But back then, that was a massive, massive world-changing earthquake. And the second earthquake is understated, and everybody gets it wrong. When they said you should amend this Constitution, what that did was it allowed for nonstop revolutions. Every amendment is a revolution so that you don't have to go to violence, you don't have to pick up muskets, et cetera. And so they anticipated, and they were right, that we would expand the circle of liberty. And guess what? We did, it did work. Because if capital was always the oppressor, well, then there would be no way out. Then we would have never ended slavery, and we would have never had the civil rights movement. We would have never had the suffragettes. We would have never had any of those things. And we did have all those things. Now, it is extraordinarily difficult, and we wish it wasn't. That's why we're trying to fix the system. And right now, it has become more difficult than it has ever been, in a sense, in American history.
But we're not in disagreement on this. My point is that it is ahistorical to look at this. I mean, you already admitted it. It's ahistorical to look at this and say like, oh, well, ultimately we will expand rights, and then that's how we're supposed to do it, and assume that like that's precisely how things would go. Obviously, every single instance of social progress and even economic progress, albeit that was less frequent, has been done through a lot of public pressure. And of course that it still happened. And I get that, and that's great, but it almost feels like you and I are in agreement that there is a next stage in this evolution, and my point has always been that that next stage in our evolution comes from increasing the democracy that we experience.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.